John Carter was just a quiet human who worked with machines and tools on the Valeria space station, where humans and aliens lived and worked together. Every day without trouble or drama, and that was how he liked it. Simple, clean, quiet. He was not a soldier or a hero, and he did not like loud places or dangerous things, and he never wanted to be the center of attention. But on this one strange day, his life changed forever, in a way he never saw coming, and it all started with a broken door and a wrong hallway. The station was large and full of twisting paths and glowing walls and strange alien symbols that looked like dancing lights to John, but he had walked the same path every day for weeks. So he thought he knew it well until the alert came from the maintenance system saying room B73 in Sector 9 had a fault in the air seal and the door sensor was not working. Right, he took his toolkit and checked the map on his small tablet, but the screen flickered for a second and loaded the wrong layout, and he did not notice the change as he turned left instead of right and walked down a long and silent hallway. With silver walls and soft blue light under his feet, there was no one around and everything seemed calm, so he reached the end of the hall and stopped at the door that said B73 in alien text, which he could not read, but he trusted the system and started working on the panel beside the door without knocking or calling out. With a small click, the door slid open without sound, and he stepped inside, still looking at the tools in his hand and not at the room around him, until he heard a sudden sharp sound, like a breath drawn in fear or surprise, and then the silence after. Eth looked up and froze like a statue, because standing in the center of the room was an alien woman with skin like polished silver and glowing blue eyes that watched him without blinking, and she was wearing nothing at all, not a thread of cloth or armor, just her bare form, like a statue of light and grace and strength. For a long second, they both just stared at each other, neither speaking nor moving, and the soft light in the room made everything seem slow and strange, like a dream or a scene from a play. John felt his heart pound in his chest like a drum, and his face burn with heat and shame as he turned his eyes away and stepped back. But before he could speak or say sorry, the alarms in the hallway began to flash, and a group of guards ran in through the side door with weapons drawn and faces hard like steel. They shouted in a language he did not know, but it did not sound friendly, and they pointed their long thin rifles at him, while two of them grabbed his arms and pushed him down to his knees, as if he had done something terrible. He tried to speak and explained that it was a mistake, that he did not mean to see anything, and that the door had opened, and he thought it was just another broken room. But the guards did not listen and dragged him out into the hallway with rough hands and cold voices. The alien woman followed them with a calm face and eyes like fire and ice, as if she was not angry but thinking deeply about something big and serious. And when they reached the center hall, where others could see them, she raised her voice and said one word that made everyone stop and stare. Marriage. There word echoed in the metal halls like a bell, and even the guards looked confused and nervous as they glanced at each other and then at her, as if they were afraid to speak or act without knowing what she truly meant. John did not understand, and he blinked at her with wide eyes as she walked slowly to him and looked down at his face with an expression that held no hate but something even harder, like duty or law or something old and unbreakable. He asked her what was happening, but she said nothing else, and only turned to the guards and nodded once like a signal, and they moved again, dragging him down another path, this one darker and filled with strange whispers and flickering lights. He felt like he had stepped into a story, not real life, as if the air was thicker and his breath harder to hold, and with every step, his mind raced with fear and confusion, and the same word spinning in his head again and again like a strange song. Marriage to a woman he did not know, from a world he did not understand, because of an accident that should not have happened, and yet somehow had changed everything in just a few minutes. And as the doors closed behind him and the silence returned, he knew that nothing would ever be simple again. The room was cold and full of light, but John did not feel the light at all as he sat alone in the middle of the great chamber, his hands tied behind his back with glowing ropes that hummed with strange energy and made his skin feel like it was a beetle. Stone walls rose around him with alien carvings that moved like waves when he blinked, and high above sat a circle of figures dressed in long robes of dark silver and red, their faces hidden behind masks that looked like the stars, and their voices deep like thunder behind clouds. He tried to speak, but the ropes pulled tight every time he moved, so he waited as the guards stood silent beside him, and the air filled with quiet fear and heavy thoughts like thick water pressing against his chest. Then the tall doors opened again, and she walked in. Commander Sailrin of Valeria, her head high, her steps strong, her silver skin shining under the white lights, and a long black cape flowing behind her, like a shadow with a mission. She did not look at him as she passed by him, and stood before the High Council with her arms crossed, and her voice ready to strike. This human saw Me, she said, her words sharp and smooth like a blade through silk. He saw me as no outsider ever has, and now the law is clear. He must be bound, or he must be proven. Council was quiet for a long moment, then one voice spoke slow and deep. Do accept the bond, warrior of Valeriash. Not at once, not like a bride, but like a soldier. John's heart pounded like a drum in a storm as the guard pulled him to his feet, and he shouted that it was all a mistake, that he did not mean to look, that he did not want to marry anyone. He did not even know her name, but the council did not answer him, and neither did she. Instead, one of the masked elders raised a hand, and the ropes vanished from his wrists, leaving behind small glowing marks that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Other elder stepped forward, holding a round object made of crystal and metal, and placed it between John and Sale. Rin, and the lights in the room dimmed like night. Falling on the sea, place your hand on the bond seal, the elder said, and let fate be written in flesh and blood. John looked at her, his mind screaming, his mouth silent, his legs shaking, and still he raised his hand and placed it on the seal, as she did the same, and in that moment a flash of blue light wrapped around their hands like fire that did not burn, but whispered old secrets into his skin. Bond is made, the council said in one voice. Like the wind across mountains, the human and the warrior are now life joined in spirit and law and breath. As long as one lives, the other must live. As long as one dies, the other must die. John gasped and pulled back, but it was done. The mark on his wrist glowed brighter, and he could feel something new inside him, like a second heartbeat, like a voice not his own that said, I am not alone anymore. The ceremony ended without music or smiles, and the guards led him away again. This time not as a prisoner, but as something strange, not yet a husband, not yet a guest, but no longer just human. They took him to a new room, smaller, quieter, with soft lights, and one bed in the corner, and there they left him alone with his thoughts, and his fear, and his heartbeat, that now somehow matched the rhythm of someone else's life. She came later, without armor, without cape, wearing only a simple tunic, and eyes that held no anger, just silence. You saved your life, she said, and maybe mine too, without knowing it, and now we are tied in ways that even I do not fully understand. He asked her why. She said yes, why she let this happen, because they would have killed you, and blamed me, and started a war, and I am tired of war, she said, her voice not loud but heavy like rain on old stone, and maybe because the law is older than us both, and no one dares to break it. John sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the mark on his wrist, glowing soft and strange, and he wondered what kind of bond this truly was, and if it was made of law or fate, or something else hidden in the stars. She stood by the door, her eyes still, watching him, but not like before, not with fear or command, but something more like curiosity or warning. Sleep, she said. We leave this place soon, and your life as you knew it is already gone. Then she left him alone again, and the lights dimmed, and the hum of the room became the only sound, and he lay back with his eyes wide open, waiting for morning, waiting for answers, and wondering how one small mistake had pulled him into a world where love meant duty, and survival meant marriage, and silence could be louder than any scream. The sky above Valeria was always dark, but full of moving lights, like rivers of stars dancing across the black ceiling of space, and John stared at them through the small window, in his new room, feeling both trapped and floating at the same time. As if he was no longer part of the world he had known. He had not spoken much since the bonding. The mark on his wrist still pulsed, gently, like a reminder, like a soft tap on the shoulder, that never stopped, and he did not know what it meant, or where this strange bond would lead him, but he knew it could not be undone. The door opened without sound, and she entered again. Sale Rin, the warrior, the stranger now called his bondmate, dressed in light armor, and standing tall like someone who had never been afraid of anything in her life. She said nothing at first, and neither did he, the silence growing like a wall between them, but also a path, and then she moved closer and stood in front of him. Her eyes calm but sharp. You have questions, she said, her voice flat but not cold, and he nodded slowly, unsure what he could even ask. First, why me? He said in a whisper. Why not lie and say it never happened? Because I am not a liar, and because many eyes saw what happened, and because the law is not a game, she said, as she sat across from him with her back straight like a blade, and her hands resting on her knees. I could have said nothing, but then they would have killed you, and perhaps even me, or worse, started a conflict between your people and mine, and I do not wish to see more blood spilled for something so foolish. He looked down at his hands, feeling the heat rise in his chest. Not from anger, but from shame, from fear, from confusion, and also from something else he could not name. So this is not real? He asked. No love, no choice. It is real, because the bond is real, she said, and our lives are now linked, not by feelings, but by duty and consequence. But maybe that is more honest than your human love, which changes like the wind. He frowned. At that, her words cutting in a way she did not mean, but still sharp, and he wondered what kind of life she had known to speak. So simply about duty and death, and survival. What happens now? He asked, and she leaned forward just a little, her eyes never leaving his face. Now, we prepare to leave this place, because staying here means danger for both of us. The council is divided. Some believe this bond is a threat, others think it is a tool, and I do not wish to be either. He blinked, surprised by the honesty in her voice, and the weight behind her words, and he saw for the first time not just a warrior, but a person tired and alone. Where will we go? He asked, not sure if he wanted to know the answer. Somewhere quiet, she said, not on Valeria, not in your space either, a place where the bond can breathe, and we can think, and maybe even learn to speak without fear. He nodded slowly, trying to understand all that had changed in so little time, and wondering if he would ever feel normal again, or if this was his new life. Forever she stood again, her movements smooth and sure like waves over stone, and looked down at him one more time, her face unreadable but not unkind. I will not force closeness, she said. I will not ask for love or trust, but I will protect you because you are now part of my blood and my name, and I take care of what is mine. Words hung in the air, strong and clear, and he felt them settle in his chest. Like armor, like a strange kind of promise. I do not hate you, he said, and she tilted her head as if the words were strange but worth hearing. I do not understand you, she replied, but I will try, and maybe that is enough for now. She turned to leave, but paused at the door, her hand resting on the frame as if she had more to say but chose silence instead, and then she was gone, leaving him with the stars outside and the soft glow of the bond on his wrist. John sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the station and the beat of his own heart, now forever tied to another, and he wondered what kind of marriage this was, where duty came before love, and strangers became lifelines. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, something true could still grow from something forced, and that even in the coldness of space, warmth could begin with one simple act of kindness wrapped in armor. The ship they used to leave Valeria was old and slow, with panels that hummed too loud and lights that flickered like they were afraid of the dark, but it was fast enough to get them away from the council, and that was all they needed for now. Jean sat near the window, watching the stars pass by like silent ghosts, while Sail Rin stood near the controls, her hands moving with care and focus, as if flying this ship was no different than fighting in a war. They had spoken little since the escape, and the silence between them had grown deep like a cold river. Neither of them wanted to cross, but it was only a matter of time before the truth had to surface like something heavy that could no longer stay hidden. She turned to him, finally, her eyes calm but heavy with something he could not name, and she said, we need to talk. He nodded without speaking, his chest already tight with questions that had been waiting too long. The bond you carry is not just a mark, she said. It is something ancient, something alive. It ties our breath and blood, and if I die, you will die, and if you suffer, I will feel it too. He looked down at his wrist where the mark still glowed soft and blue, and he remembered the first night when it pulsed with his heartbeat and made his skin feel like it was no longer his own. Why does this law exist? He asked. Why such a strange rule for something so small as seeing someone without clothes? She sat across from him, her shoulders lowering, as if the weight of the answer was too much to carry standing. It is not about shame or modesty, she said. It is about vulnerability and trust. In my culture, to see someone without their armor is to be part of them, in a way deeper than words. It means you hold their life in your eyes, and that can only be done with honor or punishment. He tried to understand, but it felt far from anything human, far from anything he had learned on Earth, where accidents were forgiven and moments passed without blood. So the bond is a shield. He asked, something to stop war, to make peace. He nodded, but her face told him there was more, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. There are those who want this bond broken, not for justice, but for power. If they kill you, I lose my shield. If they kill me, you become a symbol they can use to turn others against my house, against everything I have fought to protect. He felt cold, not from the ship, but from the truth that he was not just bonded, he was now a piece in a game. He did not understand. Do you trust me? He asked, not sure if he wanted to hear the answer. I do not know you, she said, and yet I feel your pain. I hear your breath in my dreams, and I carry your fear in my chest. So maybe trust will come, or maybe it already has, and we are just too proud to see. I looked at her then, really looked, and saw the lines under her eyes and the tired set of her mouth, and realized that she was not just a warrior or a commander. She was someone who had carried too much for too long. You saved me when you did not have to, he said, and I will not forget that, and maybe I can protect you too, in ways you cannot yet. See, she smiled then, just a little. And it was the first smile he had seen from her, and it made the cold in his chest break a little like ice under sunlight. They sat in silence again, but this time it was not heavy, it was soft, like a blanket shared between strangers who had survived the same storm, but the peace did not last later that night. John woke with fire in his throat, and his skin burning like metal in the sun, and he fell to the floor, gasping for air as the ship spun with lights that were not real. Sail Rin found him shaking, cold and pale, and she knew at once he had been poisoned, not through food or drink, but through the bond itself, a shadow strike, meant for her that reached him instead. Without thinking, she drew a blade from her belt and sliced her palm, letting her blood drip onto his lips, and whispered words in her tongue that called on the bond to share strength. He gasped as warmth filled his chest and color returned to his face, and the mark on his wrist burned bright for a moment, before fading back to soft blue when he opened his eyes. She was still there, watching him with worry, not anger, and her voice was low and fierce. When she said, "They know we are running, and they will not stop," he reached for her hand, not knowing why, only that it felt right. And she did not pull away, and for the first time the silence between them was not a wall or a river, but a path. They could walk together, one slow step at a time. The stars outside were not friendly anymore. They blinked like warning lights in a dark ocean, and the silence of space felt like it was waiting for something to go wrong, and John felt it to a strange weight, pressing on his chest, as if the bond itself was warning him. Sail Rin sat at the controls, her eyes scanning the screen, her fingers still and sharp, like the blades she used to wear on her arms. Back on Valeria, but even she was tense, her shoulders stiff, her voice quiet and short. When she spoke, the poison had come without smell, without taste, it had touched. John threw a link that was meant for safety and turned it into a weapon, and now they both knew they were being hunted, not by chance, but by design. "We need to land," she said, her voice low. "We need to move before they track our trail through the stars." Again John did not argue. He still felt the fire in his chest, the echo of pain that had almost killed him, and he trusted her now, not just because of the bond, but because, when death came, she had stood between it and him without fear. They found a moon not marked on most charts, covered in ice and old rock, with broken towers from a forgotten war, and hidden caves under the ground, where no signal could reach and no eyes could follow. The ship landed with a soft hiss, and they moved quickly, gathering what little they had: weapons, food, water, and a small device that could hide their presence like dust thrown into a storm inside the cave. The air was cold and thin, and the walls were marked with strange lines, old language, maybe older than both of them, and John touched them with his fingers, feeling nothing but stone, and still something deeper, like a whisper trapped inside a seal. Rin built a small fire using tools from her belt and pieces of tech from the ship, turning cold metal into soft light and warmth. And they sat close, not for love, not yet, but for the heat and the safety of being near. She looked at him then, her eyes not sharp, but tired, and she said, "There is something I have not told you, and it is time you knew." John watched her face, waiting as her voice fell lower. "That bond between us is rare, not just for the law, but for what it does. Only warriors of high rank can form it, and it was once used only in times of great war, when two lives needed to become one for the sake of many." He listened without speaking, the fire crackling softly between them. "The old days," she said, "a bond like this was called soul chain, and it meant that if one died, the other did too. But if they both lived, they could share strength and thought, and even feeling, not like reading minds, but like knowing a storm is coming before the sky changes." John stared at her heart, racing, and asked softly, "Is that happening to us now?" "Maybe," she said. "I feel things I should not. I see flashes that are not mine, and I wake up with your dreams in my head, and that is why they want us broken or dead, because if we learn to use the bond, they will lose control." He breathed in, slow, feeling the air cold in his lungs, and tried to speak, but her hand rose, and she turned her head sharply. "Someone is here." She moved like wind, silent and fast, her weapon already in her hand, and her eyes glowing faint in the dark, and John followed, close behind, crouching low, heart-pounding, ears straining for sound. They reached the edge of the cave, where shadows danced and light from the stars fell through cracks in the rock, and there they saw the shape of a man, not from Valeria, not from Earth, a mercenary, maybe tall and thin, with eyes like glass and a knife in each hand. He stepped forward, slow, like a hunter smiling without warmth, and said, "The bond is a curse, and you both will die for its sale." Rin moved first, spinning low and fast, her blade meeting his with a sound like thunder wrapped in silk, and they fought without words, blades flashing, feet sliding over stone. Breath sharp and short. John wanted to help, but his body froze, his hands shaking, until he saw the mercenary cut her arm and blood fall, and then something snapped inside him, and he rushed forward, grabbing a rock and throwing it with all his fear and anger. The Rock hit the mercenary in the side and made him stumble, and that was all Sail Rin needed. Her blade found his chest, and the fight was over in one sharp breath. She stood panting, eyes wide, face pale, and John rushed to her side, helping her sit, holding her arm and pressing cloth to the wound. "You saved me," she whispered, and he shook his head. "You saved me first." They sat there in the cave, blood on stone, breath warm in the cold, and the bond between them silent but strong like a line of light. No knife could cut. The sun on the ice moon never moved. It stayed low in the sky like a dying ember, barely lighting the jagged rocks and frozen paths. And for 3 days they stayed in the cave, while the ship repaired itself. And the stars outside stayed quiet, and cold. Sail Rin's wound healed slowly, her alien blood thick and silver, and strong but not without pain, and John stayed close, helping her clean the cut and change the bandages. And they spoke more now, not like strangers or enemies, but like two people stuck in the same dream, unsure when it would end, or if it had just begun. One night, while the fire burned low, she asked him a question with no warning, and no kindness, but not with anger either. "Do you miss your world?" He thought for a long moment, watching the flames dance across the stone walls, and then said, "I miss the quiet, I miss the sky, I miss the smell of trees after rain, but not the people, not the noise, not the way." They looked at each other like they were always waiting for something to go wrong. She nodded once, slowly, like she understood, and said, "My world was never quiet. It was always sharp, always moving, always demanding more and more, until there was nothing left of who you were, just duty and orders, and the silence of command." They sat in that silence again. But now it was soft like a blanket, and John felt something warm in his chest, something that was not fear or confusion, or even the bond, but something gentler, something waiting. The ship blinked green. It meant it was ready, and the engines hummed low and steady like a sleeping beast, and they packed their things in silence, with no rush, no panic, only steady hands and quiet steps. "Where will we go?" he asked, as they stood at the edge of the cave, the stars above like eyes watching. "Somewhere forgotten," she said. "Somewhere neither of our names mean anything. Somewhere we can choose our own meaning." He nodded, not because he agreed, but because he wanted to try, and that felt close enough to belief. They boarded the ship and lifted into the sky, the cave shrinking behind them, and the ice moon turning into a pale circle, and then nothing but another point of light in the endless black. Sail Rin entered the coordinates by hand, not trusting the system to guide them anymore, and John watched her fingers move with care, with purpose, and with something else that felt new, like hope. As the stars shifted around them, and the engines grew quiet, he looked at her and said, "You called this a bond of duty, but it feels like something more now." She turned to him, her face unreadable, but her voice soft, and said, "Bonds can change, just like people, just like stars, just like names." He looked at the mark on his wrist, and remembered the fire, the pain, the cold floor, and her blood saving him, and asked, "What happens if we never go back?" "Then we are free," she said, "and maybe that is worth everything we have lost." The ship drifted now, slow and quiet, through an empty part of space, where no signals reached, and no maps guided, and the stars here were not on any record, just silent and beautiful. And Alonjon began to sleep better each night, and in his dreams he saw flashes of silver light, and strong arms, and voices that were not his, but felt close, and when he woke he could still feel her breath near, like the last echo of a song. They spent days fixing broken panels and cooking simple meals and telling stories with quiet voices and soft laughter, and the bond between them grew not louder, but deeper, like roots under soil not seen but always there. One morning, she brought him a small metal box wrapped in old cloth and said, "Open it." Inside was a piece of stone, smooth and warm, with strange writing carved into it. And she said, "This is my name in the old tongue, the name before war, before command, before duty, and I want you to have." Ith held the stone gently and said, "Then you should have something of mine." And he gave her a small patch from his old Earth uniform, the letters worn, the edges torn, but still strong. They sat together holding these pieces of their past, and for a moment the ship felt like home, not a cage or a shield, but a place chosen, not forced. Later, as they floated near a dead star, watching the rings of dust move like slow rivers, she said, "We could stay here. No one would find us, no one would ask questions." He looked at her and said, "I want to stay, not because I must, not because I fear, but because I choose." She said, "Then it is done, and we begin." Agnand. The stars around them kept moving, quiet and endless and kind. The planet was not on any star map. It had no name, no records, no warnings. Just a soft green glow, and a peaceful silence that stretched from the sky to the sea. And when their ship entered the atmosphere, the clouds opened slowly, like curtains pulled back to reveal a stage waiting for its first play. John looked out the window and saw forests wider than cities, mountains sharp and blue, and rivers that moved like silver threads through the land, and he felt something shift inside, something deep and quiet like a lock turning sail. Rin stood beside him, her eyes focused, her breath steady, and her voice low when she said, "This place has no walls, no guards, no history. We can build something here, something that belongs only to us." They landed near the edge of a valley where trees bowed gently in the wind and the air smelled fresh and wild and clean, and they stepped out of the ship. Together, boots pressing into soft earth that had never known war or fear or duty. 4 days they worked side by side, building shelter, gathering food, learning the patterns of the land and the sky, and at night they sat by a small fire watching stars they did not recognize, and speaking of things they had never shared before. John told her about his home on Earth, a place with rain that sang against the rooftops, and music that made no sense, but still touched the heart, and laughter that came from nothing, and everything's ow. Rin spoke of her first memory of battle, the weight of armor, the heat of fire, the sound of her name shouted by voices that no longer lived, and how for so long she thought that was all she would ever be. But here they were different, not bound by law, not chased by enemies, not pretending to be what others needed, only learning what it meant to be themselves. One night, while the moon was high, and the air cool and sweet, John reached out and took her hand, not as a bondmate, not as a protector, but as a person reaching for another, and she did not pull away. She held his hand in return, and in that silence they felt something grow that had no name, and needed none. The bond between them still pulsed gently, still whispered in the quiet moments, but now it did not feel like a chain or a shield. It felt like a song without words, something that had begun long before either of them understood. Seasons passed. Slowly the trees changed color. The river rose and fell, and they built more than shelter. They built a life with small things, and shared moments, and a peace that was not loud but full. They planted a garden, and watched it grow together, arguing over which seeds to place. Where laughing when nothing grew, and cheering when the first fruit appeared like magic from the soil. They found old stones with carvings, and turned them into markers for paths and memories, and when it rained, they danced barefoot on the soft ground, not caring who watched, because no one did in time. They stopped counting days, stopped looking at the stars with fear, and started naming the hills and trees and streams with names only they would ever know. John still dreamed sometimes of the station of alarms, of voices shouting in cold metal halls. But when he woke, he felt her beside him, warm and real and safe, and those dreams faded like smoke in the morning. Light Sail Rin watched him with new eyes. Not as a duty, not as a mistake to protect, but as a partner, a friend, a choice, and she wondered if this was what her people had forgotten when they made laws so strong they forgot the hearts they were meant to protect. One evening, they sat by the fire with the first signs of another season coming, the wind softer, the stars brighter, and she said in a quiet voice, "I never thought I would know." PC looked at her, his hand finding hers, and said, "I never thought I would find it in someone like you, but here we are." She smiled a real smile, not small, not guarded, and said then, "Let this be our truth, our story, our beginning, not born from law or fear, but from As the fire crackled and the stars watched over them, the bond between them shone with a light, not seen, not touched, but felt deep and strong and alive. They were no longer bound by accident or law or survival. They were bound by time, by growth, by the simple power of staying when it was easier to run, and in a world that had no name, they wrote one of their own together.